Hi there, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome to our last session of this conference. I hope that you've enjoyed it, and thanks so much for sticking it out and not running for the exits. And that is our panel today. We're going to talk about, this crisis that we're facing in journalism. I feel it's a crisis. It's a crisis that I went through. I left journalism in March 2021, and if anybody wants to talk about that experience or what that transition was like, I'm happy to chat privately about it. But what we have today are two folks who have been in journalism. We can talk about whether they're actually outside of journalism now. That will be something that we talk about. And without further ado, let's begin by introducing our panel. Let's start with Marissa Nelson.
Hi, no, it's not on. Hello? Do you want to try mine, Marissa? There we go. Hi, everyone.
Perfect.
There we go. Hi, my name's Marissa Nelson. At the moment, I'm Vice President of Consulting and Local Media for a company called Magid, which is one of the biggest media strategy consultancy firms. And before that, I did 10 years at the CBC. My last job was as the Senior Managing Director for the 8 stations in Ontario. I came to broadcast from actually digital, which is sort of an unusual career path, but I've been a journalist for nearly 25 years.
Fantastic. Anita.
Hi, my name is Anita Lee. I am currently the founder and publisher of a hyper-local publication called The Green Line that's all about investigating the way we live to help young and other underserved communities survive and thrive in a rapidly changing city. I'm also a media consultant under my company, The Other Wave. I've consulted institutions like CBC, Pink Triangle Press, which oversees Extra, McConnell Foundation, American Press Institute, just basically a lot of media-focused institutions and adjacent institutions across North America. Prior to that, I've been in the industry for the better part of 2 decades. So I've worked in legacy Canadian journalism institutions like CBC, the Globe and Mail, Toronto Star, and CTV in all manner of roles, from editing to reporting to producing. And then the latter half of my career was largely in American digital media outlets, where I was news director at an urban-focused publication called Complex Media. I also worked at Mashable, as well as Fusion Media as well. So that's me.
Fantastic. So I think the question that we all want to talk about is, what is driving the current exodus from journalism? I'll start with you, Marissa. I know that there are multiple factors, but...
Yeah, I think a lot of people, thing one, I think, is coming out of COVID. There's exhaustion. People are sort of re-examining their lives. I think people are bristling against our ability to be flexible or not be flexible, as the case may be. And journalism just isn't as sexy as it used to be. There's a lot of people in the world that don't like us now in a way that 20 years ago they did like us. So I think the reputation of journalism is actually hurting people. And I would say people can be content creators in all sorts of organizations that aren't journalism. And sometimes those are a little more sexy than sort of your traditional path.
So we talk about this thing called the Great Resignation, but sometimes I think it's about the Great Reprioritization. We had a lot of time to think about what's important in our lives. How do we actually want to spend our time day in and day out? And given all the isolation that we've gone to, we did actually have a lot of time to think about that. And one of the things that I thought was interesting that we'll talk about here, and we've talked about in other panels, is this idea of flexibility. Before COVID, I can tell you from 20 years in television, it was absolutely unheard of that anybody could possibly do their job from home. Not possible. COVID happens overnight. Everybody is working from home. So I think that people are really thinking about, okay, the rules that applied to journalism before that I thought applied maybe don't apply now. And so I think that there's a great deal of points of tension in that sense of, what are the rules around journalism? So I'll pose the same question to you, Anita. What do you think is driving the exodus?
I think there's been a lot of disruption of systems and just the way we think of the world, and obviously, as a result, our industry. I'm also a journalism instructor. I teach at the City University of New York, Toronto Metropolitan University, as well as Centennial College. So I work with a lot of younger people in their late teens, early 20s who are thinking about going into journalism. And sometimes their conception of journalism is radically different from the way I came up. When I did my Master of Journalism at Carleton University, and it was a very traditional education that provided a really strong foundation, and it was very clear about what the best practices in journalism were. Whereas nowadays, I think a lot of young people are more comfortable challenging those status quo best practices, for better or for worse, without necessarily the foundation of understanding of what the industry is in its current state. But I think there's a lot of reason for that. Like some of the things that Marissa said around flexibility, a desire for more autonomy, a desire, a focus for a holistic kind of way of living, like just focusing not only on your career, but also the quality of life, your mental health, and also just questioning what good journalism is in this day and age of like misinformation and disinformation. There's a lot of focus on justice-oriented issues, or whether objectivity is something that we should consider a holy grail. So these things I think are really kind of changing the industry in a way that is changing the definition of journalism in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I mean, in the middle of COVID, we did research. We talked to thousands of journalists across the U.S. in hundreds of different newsrooms. And when we asked them, does your manager frequently ask you about your health or or your family's health, only 17% said they frequently heard from their manager about their health or their family's health. And so I also think there's this, the tradition is we don't care for the whole person, that managers are managing the output. And I think, I think our industry has talked about that for a long time, but I think we're there now. The expectation is that you're managing the whole person, not just their output that ends up on the screens or on the air.
So I mentioned at the beginning of this that I myself made a very difficult decision, which took years actually, to leave journalism. Have you left journalism, Marissa?
No, actually. No, I would say I'm closer to content now than I have been in 15 years. All I do is talk to journalists, work with journalists, watch the product, try to help people make their product even better, talk about storytelling, creative storytelling. So I'm actually, I feel like I'm in this great renaissance of going back to content after, so many years of managing teams.
And I think the content is the thing that journalists really love to do. And I think that there's a lot of things that come along sometimes with being in newsrooms or becoming managers. How many of you out there are managers or have been in the newsroom spaces? So not easy to be a manager, right? There are a lot of things to consider. And I never went to manager school. I went to journalism school. So I think that those challenges are also something to consider when it comes to, how many people are thinking, is this what I really want to be doing for the foreseeable future? So Anita, same question for you. Have you left journalism?
So unequivocally, no, which I'm really happy. It's the only job I've ever done. It's the only job I'm good at, so I don't intend to leave ever. And so it's just that the roles have evolved significantly. Like I focus a lot on audience engagement, consumer revenue, business models, community-driven journalism. There's just a lot more at play when it comes to the different roles that you can take on in the industry. So I just have a lot of touch points, similar to Marissa. So I consult. So I'm also a journalism instructor. So I do research and I engage with students. But I also, as a publisher, I edit and produce content. I also oversee and manage a team. So for me, it's a lot more gratifying and fulfilling because I'm able to I love all elements of journalism, aspects of journalism, so it allows me to kind of engage with all those touch points. It just looks different than what I would have imagined growing up. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent for a magazine, and that is a lot more of a straightforward job title than what I have now, so it's a struggle to explain that to my parents.
One of the things I want to say is that during this discussion, I want it to be as interactive as possible. So if you have a question, just let us know. We'll incorporate that question as we go. And if you could, when you do ask your question, stand up and speak into the Google thing so that we can see you and hear you. Oh my goodness, we have a question right away. Fantastic. Here comes the Google thing.
Is this on? Okay, there. Hello, I'm Madison Fitzpatrick, here yesterday as well. So I would definitely consider myself a young journalist. I've been only in the field for about 3 years now. And one of my concerns that I guess I have been perceiving from my fellow colleagues who are around my age or are new to journalism coming in, a lot of people have gone to school for journalism, gotten into the field, and then are leaving because there's not enough full-time positions out there. And I just wondered if you would be able to talk to that, because it's not that, my colleagues didn't love journalism. They did. It's just in our market, in our life right now, it's not affordable to only work a part-time job, possibly work a part-time job, get those benefits, but not even get paid 40 hours a week, even though you're working them. So I thought that was an interesting point. And if you guys could talk to that, that would be great.
So we've actually had clients in the US have MMJs turn full-time jobs down to go and work in fast food restaurants because they had better benefits and better pay. So I get it. I totally hear you. And actually, I was, a couple of days ago, I was actually on LinkedIn as I was sort of getting ready for this, and I searched content creator, and there was literally 3 pages of content creator jobs, which were super sexy sounding, before I got to any of the traditional media players, which is interesting, right? So what I would say is there's opportunities. I think, Anita and I have a fairly non-traditional sort of career paths. We're in perhaps less traditional spaces. So what I would say is there's tons of opportunity, and actually I'm going to talk a bit about, to the managers in the room in a second, about some of the things I think as an industry we need to consider in terms of recruiting young people like you into the newsroom.
Yeah, that's definitely real. Like what you're saying is I experienced that. Like I graduated in 2011 from my Master of Journalism, and what I see that my students have to deal with now is really tough. Like they're taking on part-time work, they're taking on contract positions that are not permanent. It's really tough to be able to get a full-time permanent position in this industry. So I just have a lot of empathy for what you guys are going through. What I will say though is it's part of the reason why the main reason why I created my own kind of career or pathway in journalism was because I wanted to do many different things, and I have a lot of different interests in journalism. But what was also kind of an offshoot or a benefit of it was that I was able to create a stable career. Obviously, I don't have benefits per se, aside from the ones that are offered by the universities that I teach at. But I was able to create a stable career by kind of doing many different things. So I mentioned consulting, I mentioned teaching, I'm also a publisher. And so I'm noticing that a lot more young folks are kind of striking out in their own and creating their own career paths. There's also, I know that I worked with, or I know somebody who was the head of a publishing company in the US who was creating a bunch of kind of short form books about different topics, and he was reaching out to many different journalists to be able to create these books. So it was another pipeline for income that they could, like a revenue stream for these journalists. So I'm noticing that a lot more journalists are creating their own pathways forward in a way that's more sustainable than just taking on contract work, say from like a major institution on an ad hoc basis. So I know that might not be, that's not necessarily the most satisfying answer, but I do think that's like a viable pathway forward in this day and age. Yeah.
You bring up a really good point as well, in the sense that journalism's a great job, but it doesn't pay very well. There are very, very few positions in journalism which pay well. There's a lot of competition for the jobs that exist. And one of the things I'll say is it's wonderful to be able to get a full-time job. I had full-time jobs in journalism, but I want to go back to something that Riley said in the previous panel in a bit of a different, she said that she had an open relationship with journalism, right? So she comes in and then she goes out. The thing is, when I would have liked perhaps a bit more of an open relationship in my full-time employment, because if I want to pursue my passion in journalism, but what I get paid is what I get paid, I would have liked to have had the freedom to then supplement my income in other ways. So I myself in my career at times, I loved what I was doing, but I felt trapped financially. And I thought to myself, journalism feeds my soul, but it's killing my pocketbook, and it's killing my financial future. And I think that that's something that people really, really need to consider. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I would just say we're in the U.S., and sometimes, there's certain things that evolve there later than us, and sometimes it evolves faster there than us. And what I would say is in this particular area, we're seeing huge advancements in terms of flexibility. There's very large TV groups that are now helping kids pay off their student loans. They're giving them, if for every year they stay on with them, they're giving them bonuses to stay there. They're allowing them to follow sort of a passion group, like they'll allow a group of journalists to come together if they're passionate about a certain topic, say, right? And really delve into that so that there's so that they can tap into the passion that brought them there. And I would say there's a huge amount of flexibility that has evolved because especially smaller TV markets are having such a difficult time getting anybody, particularly producers, to actually come and work for them. So I think, you know, they're being forced into doing some of the flexibility things you're talking about.
I also just want to add that I teach and coach a lot of solopreneur journalists, which this is kind of a cottage industry that's been emerging over the last few years, especially with the rise of things like Substack. And so, for example, Chris Curtis, who runs The Rover, has a sustainable income by just reporting on issues that his audience tells him that they want him to cover. Brandon Gonez, both of whom, Brandon Gonez, who spoke at this conference yesterday, who runs, Gonez Media and has a successful YouTube channel after leaving, a full-time job at CP24. Like, these are viable pathways forward, and you are able to create, you're your own boss, you're able to create your own sustainable form of income, and you're producing journalism that you actually care about. So obviously these two folks had a reputation in the industry already, and it's easier for established journalists to do that. But it is definitely something that I'm seeing emerge more and more. And it's something that gave me, inspiration to create my own publication as well in the form of the Green Line.
Yeah, I'll use my Univision example. So I work with 15 Univision stations across the U.S., and they have a really difficult time finding Spanish-speaking meteorologists. So they've now created a pathway from the Mississippi University, that is where everybody goes for meteorology, and they basically hire them on for 6 years. They get the young person to promise that they will finish their meteorology degree, which is 3 years. They pay for the degree, and then they have to give Univision an additional 3 years. So that's 6 years of employment plus paying for their degree, because they have such a difficult time finding Spanish-speaking meteorologists. But it's those sorts of innovations that I think I would love for more of the industry to sort of take on.
I think I'll pause now. I would really love to hear more about the research that you brought forward with you from Magid. So we're gonna go through. Marissa's gonna go through a very short presentation using the slides.
Yeah, I'm gonna actually. Oh yeah, it's up. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to fast forward through a couple of things because we've already talked about it. The one thing I would say for the managers in the room is that I'm really seeing a lot of creativity on LinkedIn, and it's not just from the HR managers and the recruiters who are actually doing it. Here's just 2 examples. They're using it almost like a social platform. The executive producers, the managing editors, they're all using LinkedIn, and they're on it frequently to try to create a relationship with young people, to get noticed and to become aware of it. There we go. The other thing that I think is really interesting is that a lot of media organizations are actually creating these relocation guides so that kids coming out of schools who are moving all over the place, they know where to go. And this is how serious they are getting about recruiting because it's such a difficult thing for them. So lots of large Sinclair, Tegna, all sorts of large organizations have these relocation guides that their markets can use so that kids understand how to go from one place to the other. So, oh, there we go. This was just an example. So Morgan Murphy has this development program they call Journalism 365. And so, producers, reporters, fresh out of school, they end up having a month-by-month curriculum, and the ones that are chosen are hired full-time at the end. And the recruits also earn a salary, benefits, and a $5,000 bonus to help them pay off their debt. And again, that's a way that Morgan Murphy is trying to get kind of the brightest. They obviously are going after the brightest, the best in the industry, but they're trying to create a way of, making sure they come to Morgan Murphy. Here's the Univision example I was just explaining. So this is a 6-year deal with Spanish-speaking journalists and or people who are interested in being a meteorologist that I already talked about. I think that's it. Mm-hmm. I flew through.
So just a quick question for folks in the room. In terms of recruitment, how many people have had issues recruiting young reporters out of school? Okay. What about keeping people in the middle of their career? Okay. What about keeping people who have about 17 and up years of experience? Okay, so I guess most of those folks stuck around. I guess I wasn't one of them. Anyhow, good to know. We've talked a little bit about students, bringing people in. Let's talk a little bit more about that. What will attract them?
So I can start with that. I was once one of these students as well, like in my early 20s, who was like really raring to challenge the status quo, and then realized that I had a lot to learn, and then realized that there are certain status quo best practices that have existed and stayed in the industry for a reason. And so I have a more nuanced perspective of this as somebody who's now in her mid-30s and mid-career. But I would say definitely autonomy, being able to give the opportunity for young people to experiment in different fields. So maybe they find that reporting isn't their thing and editing isn't, but they can do audience engagement. There's events now. There's even, if you're a publication that does, focuses on consumer revenue, maybe they can even help with membership. There are hybrid roles that are kind of a combination of both editorial and business, which is something that I specialize in or inhabit. So that's definitely one big thing. The other is, like I said, a holistic understanding of just general quality of life. So just some level of flexibility, like Marissa said, focus on mental health, support, like more compassionate hand when it comes to management. But I also, at the same time, I do think like one of the things that I've noticed as a manager now is that there does need to be accountability. Like young people also need to understand how to hold themselves accountable and be held accountable. And to understand that this industry is a deadline-driven one. So it's about a bit of a balance, but those are probably the two most prominent things that I hear a lot from my students.
Yeah, and I'm going to take that in a slightly different way, just to say that because trust has been a theme that this conference has been focused on, and there's actually 3 elements of trust, and in our research that we've done, there's the political bias, the left versus right. There's the balance of coverage, which I think are the 2 areas that we as an industry are really focused on. And the third place that we're seeing the audience says is a key part of trust is competence. Is the journalism we're doing competent? And what do they mean by that? It's the silly typos, it's the mistakes, it's all of those elements. So one of the things I think that is so important about this particular topic to our industry is that we're seeing a decrease in trust, and part of that is driven by competence. So we have a lot of people with a lot of experience leaving the industry at the top end. We have a whole bunch of recruiting that's coming in on the bottom end, and that natural balance is not necessarily there, right? Lots of journalists with a ton of experience helped me through my career, helped me learn, and so I'm a little bit worried about that imbalance of very experienced people leaving the industry, more and more recruiting happening at the lower end of the experience spectrum, and that is going to continue to devolve the trust people have in journalism. And I would say, as that continues, younger people are going to be less interested in coming into journalism because they're like, that's not a place to be. People don't trust you. They don't like you. So it's like this compounding problem that it's actually happening.
No, I completely agree with that. That is, I would also say that when it comes to young journalists in particular, like they definitely need a guiding hand, but I think there is a way to, I see it as like younger people learning from like more seasoned folks and seasoned folk learning from younger folks, but in a different framework. So in terms of just, like I said, for young journalists who are entering the field, holding themselves accountable, honoring deadlines, being professional as well, being rigorous in their best practices is really important, and it always helps to have a mentor, an older mentor, to help you out in that regard. But also younger people have a really, not all of them, but this is, I think an accurate generalization where they have a facility with, emerging technology, with new platforms, with different ways of communicating in a way that is not like the traditional kind of text-based print format. These are, assets that are really great for any sort of like mainstream or like establishment or legacy institution. So I just think it's about building in frameworks that actually allow knowledge exchange to happen. Because I think when I talk to young people, they have an idea of how the industry should work without understanding the foundations of the industry. And it's well-intentioned and earnest, and we should listen to them, but also I think sometimes managers have to know how to be disliked, if that makes sense. They have to have the courage and also the I guess the certitude and the gravitas to be able to say, like, this is the way things are done, and this is the way this is why we do things the way they do, but I'm also open to learning from you as well.
And I'm going to, so on the counterpoint, if I could be, the counterpoint is also, I would say turnover is the enemy of strategy. And so we're having a huge amount of turnover, and that's affecting the level of competence that is happening in our industry. So I think the other side of that is managers really need to think about, like, what's your onboarding strategy? Because first impressions matter. What is the career pathing program you've developed for your young people? How are you going to allow them, like, how are you going to tap into their passions, you know, whether it's justice, social justice, or whatever the case may be? Like, how are you going to harness that energy? And you know, we spend a lot of time looking at what the output is, and not a ton of time thinking about the things that get us there, right? So my clients, I'm talking to them about really robust onboarding programs, and it goes beyond how to get a phoner on the air into, like, you know, how they can develop mentors, how they can have unusual career paths. So I think we really need to we need to think about retention, right? So you get these really great young people in the door. What are you doing to tap into their energy and making sure their first impressions are as good as they really need to be?
I know we have, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I just want to add one more thing. Just also building out pipelines earlier. So I'm consulting. I'm working on this project with Journalists for Human Rights as well as Meta and RBC right now, and it's a program that I designed that was based on my experience as a summer co-op student in high school, where I got to, my first experience was at the CTV newsroom in Scarborough, which was incredibly life-changing for me as somebody who grew up in a place with not a ton of access like Scarborough. And the program that we're developing builds out pipelines among high school journalists who are, like, identify as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So it's about introducing the ideas of, or the concepts of journalism to them early enough, and to be able to tell them, hey, you are able to do this, you have access to this, and just to kind of ignite the passion and to direct them towards, like, how this career path that, like, seems more viable as a result of this program. Just echoing what Marissa said about kind of solidifying those pipelines and making sure that you reach out to places that you might not normally reach out to as well.
We've got a question.
Lisa McDonald. I'm an instructor at SAIT in Calgary in the journalism program there, broadcasting program. And I completely agree with you, Marissa, because it's very difficult for some of these young people entering the industry. I've been there about 11 years now, so I've got students who have, you know, they're fairly far along on the path, and many of them are leaving, and it's just, frankly, a lot of the time they just can't make ends meet. And, you know, I think that the industry has to really look at that. And I know that, you know, I mean, everybody has financial struggles in all aspects of the industry, but, you know, when you can't live in a safe place or buy food, that's, you know, you can be as passionate as you want about journalism, but, you know, you can't eat, you know, and so I think that really has to be addressed. I think some managers are starting to get down that path. I think many young people feel that they get in, and then 5 years down the road, that's going absolutely nowhere. And I think more often this has to happen with this pathways.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see, you know, companies who can't, you know, because the financial state of the industry isn't like all that either, right? So what I've been seeing is more and more companies trying to find new and different ways. This doesn't solve the financial problem, which is absolutely a real one, but find new and different ways to add value to the experience, whether it's, you know, flex hours, helping pay off student debt, which, you know, would be a huge thing. They, more and more, they're helping with, you know, if they want to go and do a degree after they've been in for as long as you sign on for another X number of years, they'll help contribute to the cost of that. So we're starting to see more, I would say, flexibility around how companies are trying to add value to the contracts or to their employment contracts with people. But it you know, as I say, like, there are for sure people making choices based on money and, you know, fair.
One of the things, oh yes, go ahead, question?
Hi, my name is Nikki, and I recently graduated from UBC, so I'm a young journalist coming into the industry. And I just had a question about how to get that experience when a lot of the things being offered to us as young journalists are, unpaid internships. And it's just really hard because when you're going for like a competitive position that pays well and you really want, you're going against people who maybe have taken on those unpaid internships or have had a leg up, and if you can't afford to take on that unpaid work, how do you deal with getting experience and getting those competitive positions when you're competing with people who are equally as qualified as you and might have that leg up?
So I'll start. I bet Anita's going to have something to say about it. So I think what I would say is be flexible about what you think is a journalism path, right? So what we're talking about here is a very traditional path of you get a job in a station or at a newspaper or at a whatever media organization of some shape or form, and then you kind of progress there. As I said, when I did this search on LinkedIn like 2 days ago, and I just put in content creator, literally 3 pages of content creators from like TD Bank to KPMG to, and that's actually experience, right? Like for sure, I know my clients look at people who have been doing social media for non-media organizations, and that's valid experience. So I would just say, I think we all need to be more flexible when we think about, it isn't just a straight linear line. Neither of us have had a straight linear line in terms of our careers, but don't think of it as a traditional path and that there's only one path, because there's never been a need for content creators as big as now, right? Like, we didn't used to have any of these other companies looking for content creators, and the content they create is pretty great, right? Like, it's really good, and you get your experience, whether it's editing, shooting video, writing, doing social, whatever the case may be, that's valid experience.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. In fact, when I started out my career, I went through the traditional pipeline. So after I graduated from Carleton, I did the Globe and Mail summer internship, and then I did the year-long at the Star. And then I took a chance and jumped to this publication that was like effectively a tech blog called Mashable. And there that actually really defined my career, because I learned about analytics before they became an entrenched part of most newsrooms. And at the time, I remember some other students or colleagues saying like, oh, I can't believe you're doing that. Is that even journalism? And it ended up being like one of the foundational elements of modern journalism today. So similar to what Marissa said, just taking a chance, like audience engagement didn't exist before. Analytics didn't really exist like more than 10 to 15 years ago. So going off the beaten path a little bit is one way to get experience, but beyond that, also just being far more entrepreneurial as well. At the City University of New York, where I teach, there's an entrepreneurial journalism creators program, and they really encourage journalists with a particular like topical focus or community focus to strike off on their own and create their own publication. And I know that's something that when I hire my fellows for the Green Line, that's something I definitely look for, to see if somebody has the initiative to create their own thing, because it takes a lot of effort and skill to do that. So those are 2 kind of approaches.
And I'll just add too, like there's some really creative things that young people are doing on LinkedIn, for instance, right? And creating content on that platform as a way of sort of getting their name out there. So I wouldn't, finding ways to create content that's just on your own volition, I think, is also an important part of developing out your own personal brand.
We have a question on this end.
Short question, Anita, can you just elaborate a little bit on when you were talking about the pipeline, the project that you were working, like, are you going into high schools, or are you going into groups, like where are you reaching out to?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like 4 components to this program. One is a high school summer co-op experience. And we're working with major newsrooms, as well as smaller, reputable newsrooms across the country, from broadcasters to newspapers to magazines. And the second element is a more traditional kind of newsroom internship program for high school graduates, as well as students, university and college students, including journalism school students. And then there's also 2 other components where there's a training program for managers on how to manage BIPOC journalists from trauma-impacted communities. And then another, which is like a checklist or guideline for young BIPOC journalists because they face particular systemic barriers. So it's a way to kind of address this issue from a systemic perspective. But the high school component is, like I said, we work with about, I think, 6 to 7 newsrooms. and they're going to be working with a particular newsroom for a summer period. When I was a high school co-op student, I did a lot of logging, and I did a lot of like just kind of research and archives-based work with CTV, which was amazing. It wasn't like traditional reporting yet because I wasn't seasoned enough, but it allowed me to get into a newsroom, to make contacts, to be able to immerse myself in that environment. So that's something that I felt was it was really laid the foundation for my career and why I have the career I have today. So I wanted to be able to bring that back in some capacity. So that's really what the focus of the program is. It's just getting these folks, these high school students' feet wet in a way that allows them to feel like, hey, I can actually do this, and I can have a career in this, especially for folks from more underserved communities. Yeah.
We have another question. Go ahead.
My name's Tom Walters. I'm a mid-career journalist. Why does everybody laugh at that? I have a question about, you were talking about the idea of news being less sexy than it once was because people hate us now. And I guess I'm curious to know whether or not there's a role to be played, and I need to be very curious about your experience in the educational realm, Marissa, in terms of recruitment by the industry. Is there any attention being paid or effort being made to help young journalists prepare for a very challenging culture? I mean, we now see journalists doing what should be relatively uncontroversial work and getting horribly berated on social media, accused of political bias and so on. I remember a time when Woodward and Bernstein were sort of the inspiration for a lot of young people getting into journalism, and they were on the enemies list of the President of the United States. Is there, among young journalists, a desire to be liked? Is there any expectation of being liked? Is there a need to help give people a toolkit for not being liked? Girding your loins 101, right? What are the psychological tools you need? What are the professional tools you need to go into an environment that at times is bound to be abusive? And is there a role there for the industry and for education to play in preparing journalists for that environment?
Oh, I love that question so much. You actually touched on an earlier point that I made about it's important to not. It's important to, for me, like the driving force for me is like that journalism is fundamentally a principled profession, and for me, even if somebody doesn't like me or like what I do, well, so what? I'm doing something that I feel is principled and I think is important for democracy. And so I try, as an instructor, I really try to emphasize that. I think there's been a disconnect between the role of journalism and the role that it plays in healthy societies and the fact that we get to live in a country like this. And I really try to emphasize that because I do think we can get really down a rabbit hole, but I think in social media, it is a like-driven kind of experience. And I grew up in social media, like I didn't use Facebook until university. So I had an entire childhood without having to worry about how liked I was based on quantity of likes that I received. And so I do think there's an element of that at play where I teach some students sometimes who have an interesting conception of journalism where they think, oh, it's like I can become an influencer in some way, or I can, get access to notoriety and fame, when it's really not about that. And that's okay if some young people go into journalism to get those skills and they want to end up using them for different reasons aside from journalism. So I say, there are different pathways forward. Maybe this isn't quite for you. But I try to emphasize the democracy component in a way that isn't so esoteric, because sometimes it's hard, like especially voter turnout for young people is so low as well that it's hard for them to see the value of what a democracy is. But in some ways, because of all the democratic societies and institutions kind of falling around the world, and Canada being one of the few places that is really strong, I do think that actually is in some ways a helpful kind of framework for journalism students in this day and age. So that's what I try to emphasize.
And I think that also comes back to the onboarding plan that stations have, right? Like, because sometimes some of that you're going to learn as you go, right? Like the first time you're sort of pilloried on Twitter and, there's 100,000 people piling on for whatever. Like, it's in those moments that I think are actually important points for managers to get in there and lead that whole person, right? And understand the angst and the and the pain that is natural to feel when those things happen, but also help them shape it, right, and live through it. Because in some ways, I think some of that is lived experience, you know? Like, you've got to kind of go through it, and then you kind of know, oh, it gives you a sense of what to do and what not to do and how to sort of survive it. But I really think managers helping them through that, you know, through that, A, and B, thinking about that onboarding plan so we don't do what our industry has done for so many years, which is just throw them in the deep end and say, sink or swim, kid. You know, it's that idea that we have to help them on that journey.
There's probably a place for entrepreneurial and mental health preparation courses in university and in journalism programs, in addition to follow-ups within newsrooms. I can tell you, I changed jobs 3 times within the journalism industry, and every time I landed somewhere, I didn't know where the bathroom was, and I was already like, here's your camera person, go out. I don't know where the edit suite, I don't know where anything is, but go. We need a story, produce. And I think that, and that's due to a number of different things, right? There aren't a whole lot of resources. We need to, as we say, feed the beast. Content is king, queen, every other regal thing you can think of. So I think that part of it is we actually need to stop and think about investing in our people in a real way. We actually need the time to do that. If there was one thing that I felt as a journalist, was that I was always chasing time. And it was reflected in every other area of my life. I was in the grocery store line, and I would start to, like, internally, I would say this internally, not externally, but I would start to lose it because I was like, this isn't moving fast enough. I'm on a deadline. I was on a deadline buying my groceries. So I think that we need to come back and take a little bit of time there. And the one thing I wanted to talk about, we only have a couple of minutes left. We've talked a lot about young people. What I want to talk a little bit about is, what about people who are 10 years into their career? What about people like me who were 20 years into my career? What do you do to keep those people in the business? And I'll say this, I'll share this. I was afraid to go to my managers and say, I'm thinking about leaving. Like, I'm kind of disillusioned about this whole thing. And thanks for the 1% raise, but this is it's not going to cut it in this market. If you value me, can you please talk to me individually about what it is that I value? So for some people, it's perhaps a healthier paycheck. For others, it might be, can I not file every single day? Can I have just a day to breathe? Can I work on that passion project? Can I do this, that, or the next thing? One of the reasons I didn't go to my manager was because I thought they would think that I was so far gone that it'd be like, she's about to dive off. Why do we need to put in the effort to reel her back in? So what I would want to say because now I know you guys want to comment, but I just have to get this out. To the managers in the room, having been a manager myself, I made this mistake. I don't think I checked in with people enough. And I don't know that I said, like, are you actually happy? Like, what can we do? We want to keep you. What is it going to take for you? Because the answer for Corey and the answer for Rhonda and, you know, the answer for Marissa in the business would have been different. And the thing is, everybody's unhappy in their own unhappy way, and everybody can be happy in their own happy way. And that makes the job of the manager that much more complicated and difficult. Go ahead.
So I used to say to my my leadership team at the CBC, I used to urge them to talk to their employees about what is your dream. And the first time I said that, they kind of snickered at me. He was like, what do you mean? You asked. I was like, no, you should know what your employees' dreams are. What are their hopes and dreams? Because if you don't actually know what their dream is, how are you going to help them get there? And I think this particular point is, for the managers in the room, the most important thing. Retention of people with experience is so important right now. Because so many of those people are choosing to opt out, and we need the people with experience so that the young kids coming in have mentors and have people who can help them, and that we don't continue to see this increasing imbalance between people with experience and people without experience. And our industry is not great around flexibility. It's not, right? But I think the expectation now of people who are 10, 15, 20 years in is to have more flexibility. So I would say, and flexibility comes in all different ways, whether it's the kinds of stories they get to do, the days that, you know, the flex hours, the days coming in, being able to work from home. There's all different forms of flex, and every station and every organization is going to have to think about what does flex mean to them. But I think flexibility is going to be essential to keeping those people with really important skills in our newsrooms.
Yeah, nothing really to add to that, but definitely have those conversations. I definitely have left a position before where I belatedly was told by my manager that they really wanted me to stay and they valued me, but by that point I was too late. So yeah, I can emphasize that more.
Yes, there's a question. Go ahead.
I wondered about, you're dealing with stations and networks across North America. What happens when your organization is a broadcast organization, it's news and television and that, but it's taken over, I don't know, say by a phone company, and that those business models then apply to, are kind of knocked down to the broadcast area, and so you're running a newsroom, but it's on a business model from another organization that is less understanding of perhaps, and I'm not saying this about Bell, I'm just saying for any industry, less understanding of what drives us, less respectful of the product, more into profit-centered news.
Yeah, I thank you for the question. Remember earlier I talked about competence too, and I think one of the things is if you don't have high enough pay, you're not going to get competent journalists in the door. So, and competence is sort of, or a decrease in competence is sort of helping to undervalue people's trust in us. So what I would say, and we've worked with all sorts of newsrooms that have been bought by various kinds of companies. And what I would say is there's always, in my experience, there's always a yin and a yang, There's certain negative aspects because there's a bottom line, there's a higher profitability being driven, but there may be aspects of that company that you can tap into that you never could before. Maybe it's more digital developers, maybe whatever the case may be. I think in those sort of points of tension, being open to new and different ways of workflows in particular can help you kind of go through it. But when companies come in with a higher profitability expectation, there's inherently going to be things that happen, right? And it's like, the thing, it's funny because Anita and I were sort of talking about, we need young journalists to come in to understand why we do things in a certain way, because there's like a lot of years that got us there, but on the other hand, sometimes I felt, even with myself, that perhaps I have too traditional of a sense of how a workflow, just as an example, has to go, right? And trying to find those new and different ways to do things, especially in those points where a new company has come in, is even more important. To some degree, it's like that flexibility, right? In my career, I found that flexibility difficult to do in those pivot points because there's emotion in me that happens in those points of change. So I would just urge you to look at workflows, look at new and different ways of doing it. There's certain things you won't be able to control when you're taken over, but there's certain things that will actually help you change for the better. And I've seen that many, many times. There's the yin and the yang.
Are there any other questions? Any closing thoughts from anybody? Well, I hope that you all stay and that you don't run for the exits, because we need you. We need you. I may not be in journalism anymore, but I continue to follow it. I try to keep my foot in it. It will always be my passion. I might get a little emotional about it. So stay. Don't leave. Do whatever you have to do to stay and go and talk to your managers, because what I will tell you, being outside of the journalism world, the skills you have are incredible. They are immense. It is amazing. Even though we tell stories every single day, every one of us in this room, every person on the street that we pass by, the skills that we have are skills that the rest of the world really needs. And journalism, as far as I'm concerned, is the foundation for, it's the foundation for how society works. Democracy, information, education. Thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists, Marissa and Anita.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.